My name is Elise Geither, and I am the Associate Director of Spoken English Programs, which is located at USite now. So I do work a lot with the international students on campus, and I can tell you a little bit about that later as well if you have some questions. But today I'm going to talk with you about disability resources. Like Matthew said, I work a lot with the graduate TAs, and their positions are a little bit different. They have some more responsibilities as they're usually in the classroom or in the lab doing instructing, but you have some responsibilities as well. So I just want to review with you the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, give you an overview of disability resources, and then some guidelines for what you should do if you encounter certain situations. So the ADA is equal opportunity for students with disabilities. This means that they're entitled to benefit from all the programs, services, and facilities of the institution. And one area where you may recognize this is accessibility to buildings, right? So if you came in this building and you used the handicap button to open the door, that's accessibility to the building. The doors here, are they wide enough for a wheelchair to get into? That's universal design so that everybody can get in. There are buildings on campus that are not accessible. And when something like that happens, the class gets moved to another building. So this is how important the ADA is. This is a civil rights law. It's not an educational act. So if the university, if a faculty member, a staff member, you as a TA violate the ADA, this is a big problem for the university. So we want to make sure we're doing things correctly. So what do you do if you are a TA in a class and a student comes up to you and says, hey, I'm a first-year student, and when I was in high school, I had ADHD and I got all this extra help, and they let me take 2 hours for tests instead of 1 hour, and I'd like to do that too. So they've just disclosed their disability to you. You are not required to give them an accommodation. So that's the most important thing. If they're asking you, can I have 2 hours for my test instead of 1, you're not required to give that to them unless they have registered with Disability Resources. When they register with Disability Resources, they have to provide documentation from a doctor, from a professional that shows that they have a disability. And then Disability Resources will work with them to provide the appropriate accommodation. And it may not be the same accommodation that they got in high school. What we've noticed with a lot of first-year students is they got a lot of accommodations in high school. They had different IEPs. When they get to university, those accommodations change a bit. So they could be kind of confused and working their way through these new accommodations. But the most important is they have to be registered with Disability Resources. So where is Disability Resources? Where are you going to tell them to go? Sears, it's not 470 anymore, so Disability Resources is one of the departments that changed.
It's Sears 402, but I actually wanted to mention that because on Canvas it still says Sears 470.
Probably, yeah. So Disability Resources has moved. They are no longer a part of ESS. ESS is not in 470, so I'm not sure if you guys knew that, but you'll get more information about that. So Disability Resources is now under Health and Counseling, and Disability Resources has their own office in room 402 in Sears. And I'll also give you other information to connect. But if a student discloses to you, you have to tell them to go to Disability Resources. You should then inform your instructor of record. This is important. You are not required to communicate anything else to the student other than you should go to Disability Resources. The instructor of record is required to communicate more with the student, and if they don't, this could be a legal issue again. So the instructor of record only will follow up with an email to the student regarding the referral. You should not be emailing the student. So what do you do if a student does not disclose a disability, but you see that they may be struggling? Again, if you don't want to, it's a little bit it could be a little bit awkward. You don't want to say to a student, hey, I think you have a disability, you should go to disability resources, right? It is not your job to diagnose a student. But certainly you will have students that are struggling to some extent in the class. The best place for them to go is academic resources. Academic resources is now part of the Student Success Initiative, and I believe they are in Sears 356.
340.
340.
It used to be Sears 357, which is where undergraduate studies used to be.
Okay.
Your navigators and academic resources are now where undergraduate studies were, had been in the past, and the rooms on the 3rd and 4th floor of Sears have all been renumbered. So that is now Sears 340, but it's where undergraduate studies used to be.
Okay.
Undergraduate studies is now on the 4th floor in Sears 447, which used to be Sears 470 and was where ESS had been. And ESS as an entity no longer exists, but all of its functions, except for one, continue to exist in different organizational structure. We know the one that's missing. There are no ESS planners this year. People are coming to where ESS had been looking for planners, but
yeah, hopefully
there are
next
no
year
planners.
they'll have some. So the quick and easy answer here is you have a student in your lab, in your class, that is really struggling. What do I do? You do not diagnose them with a disability. You do not refer them to disability resources because they're struggling academically. You refer them to academic resources, which are now in 340, and they can meet with someone there. Someone there can then refer them to disability resources if there is a need. But again, keep in touch with your instructor. Let your instructor know what is going on, and the instructor can follow up with an email to that student. So, a quick recap. Be thoughtful when responding to student disclosures, right? This is, they're disclosing to you because they feel that you're a safe person to talk to, so be respectful. Also respect their right to privacy. If they tell you, I have a disability, the only person you should be talking to about that is your instructor of record. You should not be telling friends or anything else like that, and keep the instructor of record in the loop. Do not discuss accommodations in a public setting. So if you do have a student that you know has accommodations, for example, they get 2 hours to take the test instead of 1, that's not for you to make public knowledge. You are a professional on campus now, so this is part of your responsibility as a professional. Do not email students with accommodations. And again, do not diagnose students. That's for the professionals. So who is disability resources? Who should you be referring them to? If you have a documented disability and you need accommodations, this is where you should be going. The disability statement is or should be in all syllabi. So the class that you're working with, look at that syllabus. You can refer the students to that disability resources statement in the syllabus. Grace Clifford is the director. Ebony Porter's the assistant director, but students can also talk with Kaylee Smitley and James Bradford. And again, they're up in Sears 402. The email that students can contact them with is just disability@case.edu. And here's their phone number. If you need information on health services and counseling, that's available too. Everybody knows where counseling is located, right? Counseling is where? In the basement of Sears, 2nd floor. Do you have any questions on your responsibility as?
So, like I said, for my class, there's like a lot of TAs. Oh, sorry. So there's a lot of TAs, and so like the professor doesn't want to be overwhelmed by emails and stuff, but is this a circumstance where we shouldn't tell the head TA and we should just tell the...
I would go directly to the instructor of record.
Okay.
It's, yeah, because of the confidentiality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody hear that? So if when you're working with students with disabilities, if there's a question, you go right back to your course head or your faculty member.
Any other questions? Okay.
You had your hand up twice. Did you have a question?
Oh.
Or was that it?
I just took clarification. What's instructor of record? Is that just the professor who teaches the class?
Yes, whoever does the grades for that class.
That's what SIS calls us.
Yeah. The only other thing I want to tell you about, just real briefly, as I mentioned, I work with international students, the spoken English programs. If you have a first-year student that's in your lab, in your class, and spoken English or communication seems to be a problem, that you're talking to them and you're explaining things and maybe they're not getting it, or when they're talking to you, they're having some difficulty communicating. If you refer them to the Spoken English Tutoring Program, it's on Tutor Track. So the same way a student can get a tutor for math or chemistry, they can go on Tutor Track and they can get a tutor for spoken English, somebody they can sit down with and practice English, get some feedback, they could practice pronunciation, they could practice presentation skills. So if they come up to you and say, I have to give a presentation and I'm so nervous because this is the first time I'm doing a big presentation in English. They could work with the spoken English tutors and get some practice for that. So that's another thing that you can refer students to as well. Anybody have any questions? Certainly contact me too if you have questions about students with disabilities. I know we mentioned students on the spectrum. There are significant increases in the numbers of students that are on the spectrum, not only here at Case, but at universities nationwide. So dealing with that is important in supporting the students. Also know that your instructor of record will probably not tell you if a student is receiving an accommodation unless it's going to affect part of your job. So if a student is going to get extra time for tests, you may never know about that unless it directly impacts you. Yes?
So graded pick up quizzes or assignments that if someone takes it, can we pick it up?
Your instructor will tell you what to do. I believe the new Office of Accommodated Testing Services, which is upstairs, kind of near where ESS Study Center used to be, they have arrangements with the faculty members on how to get tests and quizzes and how to return them to where they're supposed to go. Any other questions? The final note is if a student does have an accommodation, that is not free rein to bad behavior. Because they have an accommodation does not mean they get to behave badly in class. The accommodations are to support them academically. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, again, you can contact me or Disability Resources if you have any questions.